Friday on Sky Cinema.
Tonight, the Democrats' big dilemma over Joe Biden. Should he stay or should he go? Senior governors are about to meet the president after a new poll showed 74% of Americans think he's too old for the job. Will anyone in the room tell him the same? White House staff are told to ignore the noise as the president insists he's staying in the race and on the road to victory.
The president is clear-eyed, and he is staying in the race. I don't have anything else beyond that. He's staying in the race.
Also tonight, Jamaica in the eye of the storm as Hurricane Beryl brings more death and destruction to the Caribbean. The Category 4 hurricane is hitting the south of the country. We're live on the ground with the very latest from Kingston. And we look at the damage already done with reports of unimaginable scenes in Grenada and St. Vincent. Plus, we witness catastrophic levels of hunger in Gaza and speak to those charities trying to fight back against famine. And Sir Mark Cavendish makes history by powering to a record-breaking 35th Tour de France stage win. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Let's start with the future of US President Joe Biden. Should he stay or should he go? That's the question occupying the minds of senior Democrats tonight. His unconvincing recent performance in a TV debate against Donald Trump left many questioning his fitness for office. And the murmurs of discontent are only growing louder. Democrats in Congress are now openly calling for Biden to withdraw from the race, while polling this morning showed 7 in 10 Americans think the same. According to reports in the New York Times, Mr. Biden is consulting allies about whether to continue. But it's a claim the White House has denied. Today, the chief of staff told his employees to keep their heads down and, quote, ignore the intense noise. The Biden team says they're not panicking and remain on the road to victory. That was to be the message tonight as Joe Biden meets with Democratic governors. But what will their response be? But what would anyone in the party be brave enough to tap Biden on the shoulder and say it's time to step aside? Of course, the question would then become who replaces him, and we'll get into that in a second. But first, this report from our correspondent, James Matthews, on the dilemma facing the Democrats.
In Washington, D.C., they're preparing a 4th of July party. This was Sister Sledge on Capitol Hill and their sound check. Across town, the sound was of a president in crisis. Inside the White House, Joe Biden was performing a Medal of Honor ceremony. Inside his party, there is concern that includes calls for him to step down.
Consider putting our country first and putting aside your personal interest and make that tough decision like Lyndon Johnson did under different circumstances to step aside and let us get an energetic new candidate.
Biden is going to lose to Trump. I know that's difficult, but I think the damage has been done by that debate.
President Biden has got to go out there and on a sustained basis show he has the stamina and can do the job.
Dealing with everything we have to do with
Biden's debate performance has caused serious concern among Democrats that doubts over a president's fitness for office will cost them the election.
I know how to tell the truth.
Since the debate, Biden's public appearances have seen speeches by teleprompter.
no one is above the law.
But no answers to journalists' questions.
Unfortunately,
stage management hasn't satisfied a party seeking a robust performance to offer reassurance.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Questions on a president's health and future are fielded by his staff.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Is President Biden considering stepping down?
Absolutely not. He had a cold, he was jet-lagged. The president is clear-eyed, and he is staying in the race.
Many see you as his natural replacement. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely, unequivocally not. I'm here as a passionate supporter, not just defender, and advocate for not only his record, but his vision moving forward.
Would-be replacements were dismissing talk of succession before and after the TV debate.
I have been privileged and proud.
Growing doubts have grown attention around alternatives. Republican campaign ads are already targeting the vice president.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been.
you know?
The president is holding an evening meeting with Democratic governors here at the White House. On Friday, he'll sit down for a TV interview. In an earlier call with campaign workers, he insisted he is running. No one's pushing me out, he said. But according to the New York Times, he has acknowledged that possibility, telling one ally he may have to salvage his candidacy if he can't convince the public he's up for the job. The same newspaper is carrying a poll that shows Trump has widened his lead over Biden to 6 points, his biggest lead of the race. For a president figuring out his future, it's the voice of the voter, and it won't go unheard.
And of course, James joins us live now. I mean, James, this is an incredibly tense and delicate moment and time for the Democratic Party.
It is, Yalda, and you started with should he stay or should he go. I think the direct answer to that is if he stays, there could be trouble. If he goes, there could be double. That is the difficulty for the Democratic Party. There is risk in keeping him in place. There could be more risk if they lose him. Everywhere they look, the White House, they see difficulty. This is a place firefighting. We heard Karine Jean-Pierre for more than an hour repeatedly endorsing the president, talking about how he had a bad night, he had a cold, he had jet lag. The test of all these promises that everything's going to be okay will come in the short term. Tonight, he's meeting Democratic governors here. On Friday, an unscripted TV interview. He also has campaign stops planned in key battleground states. So the next few days could well be the test, the gauge of whether or not President Biden stays in the fight and whether or not he believes he can stay in the fight. According to the New York Times, he has spoken to one ally and acknowledged the possibility that he may have to step down if he can't carry the public with him, and that has to be a real possibility. There is bad news within the past 10 minutes, I can tell you, Yalda. Already we had one congressman calling for Joe Biden to step down. We have a second today on the record, and Representative Raul Grijalva of Arizona, he said this about Joe Biden: if he's the candidate, I'm going to support him, but I think that this is an opportunity to look elsewhere. Referring to Biden, he says what he needs to do is shoulder the responsibility for keeping that seat, and part of that responsibility is to get out of this race. Let's look at the figures in that New York Times Siena poll that's come out within the past couple of hours. Uncomfortable reading for Democrats, Yalda. On Joe Biden versus Trump, it shows an increase, a 3-point swing towards Donald Trump since last week. We have Trump on 49% of likely voters versus 43% for Biden. On those who think that Biden is too old for the job, that number registers at 74%. That's a swing of 5 percentage points since last week's TV debate. So that shows you the impact of that particular episode. That was one bad night for Joe Biden, Yalda. He can't afford another one. He has caused anger throughout the Democratic Party, particularly in the House, in the Senate, on Capitol Hill. Politicians who need to win in November, and they need to trust in their president's ability to lead them to victory. There are many, some telling me that they were angry when he chose to stand in the first place, didn't trust in his mental and physical ability. They saw that as a gamble, and now they're of the view that the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah, indeed. James, thank you so much. Well, let's speak now to political strategist Nicole Brenner-Schmitz, who's worked with the Vice President Kamala Harris. Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, we're just listening there to our correspondent in Washington. The panic that we saw after the debate and at the weekend has now turned to anger, because this is not just about Joe Biden. It's not about those in his inner circle or his family. This is about the party and the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is that there was a widespread panic on Friday over what had happened at the debate. I don't think you saw anybody in the party really coming to a defense or not acknowledging that this debate was a huge problem for the president and for the party. But the response since then has also been pretty abysmal. We haven't seen the president get out there and really be Joe Biden. We haven't seen him do interviews yet. We haven't seen him do what, former Speaker Pelosi went on and called for, which is let the media have the access to you for the longest time as they want, ask whatever questions they need, and show that you are able to continue to do this job. People feel like that hasn't happened in the past week since the debate either. So there is a lot of growing concern and anger from within the party. And we're seeing that with members of Congress who are officially calling for him to step down, donors possibly holding back their money and being quite loud. And honestly, the leaks that we're seeing to the media, I mean, there is a huge amount of leaks from phone calls and meetings that are happening in the past week. And that is people trying to get that message out there into the public.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this play out, this crisis from within. The White House and the press secretary of the White House can come out all she wants and defend his position. But the fact is, the kind of leaks you're talking about, where the president is saying, well, I had a cold and it was jet lag, I didn't perform, and that's why I didn't perform very well. But the kind of leaks we're seeing, well, he wasn't, preparing enough for the actual debate. The preparations weren't starting till lunchtime. I mean, you can see the sort of cracks and also the infighting from within.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, throwing spaghetti at the wall right now about why it was a bad performance is a little ridiculous. You want to talk about he has a cold, you want to talk about the jet lag. These are really things to put out there beforehand. The reality is we knew, and by we, I mean the Democratic Party and frankly the world, a lot of the attacks and the lies that Trump was going to say in the debate. It's no surprise that he went after Hunter Biden. It's no surprise that he continued the January 6th lie. But why were we not able, and the president not prepared to respond to those? I disagree that CNN should have agreed to a debate where they weren't going to live fact check anything, but we knew that going in. So why weren't we prepared to self-fact check, to make sure that that is happening in live time for the American public? What Trump said was not a shock. So it's very disappointing, obviously, that debate performance, but very concerning how it is being handled since then and what the plan is, because the reality is there's lots of talk about should he stay, should he go, how you kicked off this segment, but there's no consensus about what happens next if him not continuing in this race does become the reality. The Democrats do not.
Let's talk about that, because names are floating around, for example. And then, of course, you've worked with Kamala Harris, and she herself is very weak in the polls as well. So there isn't, as you say, a consensus about who would potentially replace Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democrats, and look, hindsight's 20/20, but I think the Democrats have a couple different failures from prior to the debate. One of which is, why do we not have a solitary message defining Donald Trump? We're all over the place with why Donald Trump is a problem, but it isn't a cohesive, concrete message. And secondly, we had a lot of time to introduce and have the American public understand who the vice president is and what she's about. And there is a lot of misunderstanding about what kind of Democrat she is. She's actually more moderate. A lot of people don't assume that from her coming from San Francisco and California. They didn't do enough in the past 4 years to establish her, which should have been happening, because no matter what happened on that debate stage, one, she's the vice president, and two, we did have an older president who the American public has been very vocal about their concern about age.
And by the way, Nicole, yeah, I mean, if this debate hadn't happened when it did, what it does, the message it's sending now to the American people is we tried to sneak in this untenable candidate, in and say that he was fit to be president. We've now decided he's not. He's a replacement. I mean, what sort of message does that send to the American public?
Yeah, it's not a good one. I mean, that's the thing. There isn't a quick fix here, which is why it feels like the party is a little bit stunted and sort of stuck with a plastered smile on its face right now while everyone scrambles behind the scenes. But we definitely do not have a plan forward, whether if President Biden does decide not to continue, because there are a lot of different factions of the Democratic Party, and there's a lot of different thoughts about who can come in and be that person. But you have to remember, a lot of the American public doesn't know much about even a lot of the names of governors and people who are being thrown out there as possibilities. And on top of this, you've got the financial and the legal structure to think about. I mean, it's expensive to run for president, and people buy in, and they're donors. And I mean, that's unfortunately the campaign finance structure that we have in the US. Vice President Harris does inherit the war chest and the infrastructure. That's not true for any of the other possibilities. So there's a lot at stake here. Obviously, the White House was adamant today that he is continuing to run. And if that's the case, we really need to figure out, how are we communicating with the American public about Joe Biden and why they should give him 4 more years? Because the American public has been telling us for a long time now, give us anyone but these 2 people.
Yeah, indeed. Nicole Brenner-Schmitz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, we'll be live in Jamaica, where streets are deserted and the power turned off as the country prepares for Hurricane Beryl. Welcome back. Let's bring you up to speed with tonight's developing story in Jamaica. The nation is bracing itself for 140-mile-per-hour winds brought about by a Category 4 hurricane, which has already brought death and destruction to the Caribbean. Well, the hurricane is currently brushing Jamaica, bringing life-threatening conditions from devastating winds, a significant storm surge and torrential rain. Flash flooding and mudslides are expected in the country. The Cayman Islands will see similar conditions early on Thursday before Beryl weakens a little while heading towards the Yucatan Peninsula. Beryl is likely to make landfall there early on Friday as a Category 2 hurricane before easing down to a tropical storm. After that, there's some uncertainty on Beryl's track and intensity, but it may gain hurricane status again over the Gulf of Mexico this weekend. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, who joins us live from the Jamaican capital, Kingston. And Martha, I mean, the scenes have been quite devastating, what we've seen in the images and on social media of just roofs being ripped off and people's whole lives being upended.
Yes, several people have already died, Yalda, across the Eastern Caribbean, so nobody in Jamaica was taking this storm lightly. Hurricane Beryl is currently tracking around 45 miles south of where I am in Kingston. The Jamaican capital then avoiding a direct hit that government officials here were fearing, but you can see it's still brought with it huge amounts of rain, very strong winds and a potentially life-threatening storm surge. This is not over for Jamaica either. This storm is currently tracking towards the small community of Treasure Beach. It's around 90 miles west from here, and in around 2 hours' time, we're expecting the outer bands of Hurricane Beryl to directly hit the coastal communities around there. Meteorologists were predicting that this would be the worst hurricane Jamaica has experienced in many, many years. We'll get a sense in the coming hours of just what toll it's taken. But for now, here is how people were preparing.
UNICEF says Hurricane Beryl could put at least 3 million children in the Caribbean at risk. The Category 4 hurricane is fast approaching Jamaica.
They've heard the warnings about Hurricane Beryl, a monster storm heading Jamaica's way. And Hellshire Beach is dangerously exposed. But Nadine, like others, is staying here until she has no option.
Since I live here from 2008, I haven't seen it as what they are expressing and what this storm and the news are saying. So actually, we are here seeing if we see any more further eruption, we have to make a move.
An emergency curfew is in place across this island. Streets that would usually be buzzing, abandoned. The last time Jamaica was hit by such a ferocious storm was decades ago. Do you remember the last time that a storm hit Jamaica like this?
Yes, I remember quite well. It was very disastrous. We doesn't want that again. I pray to the Almighty God that it don't reach Jamaica, because we cannot take a disaster here right now.
The sea, normally a lifeline in these tourist and fishing towns, will carry the fury of Hurricane Beryl.
Nowhere is safe on the coastline. The water is what we worried about, because as you know, the storm surge comes with a force and destroy buildings and so forth. So that is our greatest threat. When the hurricane hit, there can be looting and so forth. So we have to be here to protect our boats and our businesses and so forth.
Beryl has already wrought misery and destruction across the Eastern Caribbean. Several people have died. And in Venezuela, heavy flooding has affected thousands, with widespread power outages and no safe drinking water.
This hurricane is more powerful than any in history at this time of year. It's grown so quickly too. Perhaps it's the best evidence yet that warming ocean temperatures are making weather like this more common and more deadly.
And it's the smallest, most vulnerable nations that are bearing the brunt of climate change.
I don't think it's really nature, I think it's like the bigger guys playing with the globe, you know what I mean? Because we never have a storm in this month yet. And the way they say it's going to hit Jamaica, I think is some messing up going on with the weather.
78-year-old Beryl coming in Jamaica right now.
This is a relaxed nation and a resilient one. They're hoping here that this hurricane spares them its worst, knowing that this changing climate means the next may not be far behind.
So, Martha, your report shows us how people are preparing. The question now is, what next?
Yeah, well, as you were saying earlier, this storm is now headed towards the western side of Jamaica. From there, it will track over the Caribbean Sea, where there's every possibility it could maintain the same strength of being a Category 4 or even intensify further. Obviously, people on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula are hoping that this storm weakens to a Category 2 or to a tropical storm. One thing to say about Hurricane Beryl is it's not just unusually powerful for this time of year, it is entirely unprecedented. There has never been a storm this powerful in June or July. And I think another thing to take away is just how quickly this storm has strengthened from a tropical depression just 4 days ago to a Category 5 and now a Category 4 storm. It is incredibly worrying, and it is also potentially ominous, a sign of things to come. In a normal hurricane season, experts would expect to see 3 major hurricanes, the likes of Hurricane Beryl. This year, they're predicting between 4 and 7. So this potentially, and very concerningly, could just be the start of a very damaging storm season to come.
Yeah, Martha, really worrying stuff. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Kingston. Well, with me now is Jamaican Senator Matthew Samuda. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Your Prime Minister has urged the Jamaican people to comply with this curfew that's in place. Are people taking it seriously?
Mostly it seems that way. Certainly the reports from the police suggest that most communities are quiet and that majority of persons are confined to their homes. We are seeing the increased rainfall and wind associated with the eye having passed, though it didn't make landfall. So I suspect that even those who weren't taking it seriously would have taken shelter now. But the government has been on the front foot from Friday. The Prime Minister would have instructed all agencies to initiate their emergency protocols on Friday, and we'd have started communicating with the public, as I said, just to ensure that they had all the information and they were able to prepare at the household level. So the citizens have had all the information about the risks associated with this storm. I believe that because many of them would have seen what our brothers and sisters in Barbados and Grenada and Tobago would have gone through already, that they have taken it pretty seriously. We'd have seen the impact in supermarkets, in our hardware stores. And I believe the households are generally as ready as they can be. The government simultaneously would have done quite a bit of work on our drainage system and would have cleared waterways as best as possible to reduce the impacts, such as flooding. But in a country where 70% plus of your population lives within 5 kilometers of the sea, the sort of storm surge associated with Beryl is truly worrying. Though we haven't had reports of massive damage yet, we do know and we do expect some reports similar to that to come in later this evening from areas like Treasure Beach, Alligator Pond, and southern Clarendon, and of course Portland, which is always affected by these sorts of storms.
I mean, we're yet to see the full extent of the damage where you are. But I guess that the other thing that we are hearing from so many climate experts as well is that this could potentially become the new normal. While we are in hurricane season, this kind of severity of these hurricanes and storms is earlier than predicted.
The world has warmed by approximately 1.2 degrees already, post in the industrial era. It's often been mixed up. The 1.5 degree target agreed on in the Paris Agreement isn't an ideal. It's an equal sharing of misery. It's not something that we should be happy with. So citizens of the developing world, like Jamaica, actually have to be very worried that mitigation targets of the developed world are not being met. And it's something that we continue to lobby members of the G7, members of the G20 to take seriously, because ultimately we are on the front lines. We're not the reason this crisis exists, but we are the ones that will suffer first and worst.
Yeah, as you say, you and your nation, the region, is on the front lines of this and are truly feeling the impact. Senator, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you so much for having me, and just reaching out to all Jamaicans in the UK. Continue to pray for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves has promised to rebuild after revealing 90% of homes on Union Island were destroyed. Surging sea waves have caused areas to flood, with at least one person reported to have died. Earlier, I spoke to the Prime Minister about the job ahead to rebuild lives.
Well, we have had a very horrible experience with this major hurricane Beryl. As you are probably aware, our country is an archipelago. We have 32 islands, 9 of which are inhabited. In the southern area of the archipelago, there has been utter devastation. On Union Island, an island with about 3,000 persons, everybody is homeless. There's no electricity, there's no water, there is no modern life or living. We have been evacuating persons, and we have been seeking to do the best we can there in very difficult circumstances. Several hundred houses have been destroyed, public facilities, buildings of one kind or another. There have been a barrage of the raging seas on the coastline. We have fortified, however, by the resilience of our people and by the solidarity of other Caribbean countries, and of course, other countries across the world, in Latin America, in the Republic of China, North America, Europe, including the United Kingdom. I've received a message from King Charles, who is the titular head of the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Secretariat. I've heard from friends of mine, both on the left and on the right. I've heard from Jeremy Corbyn. I've heard from David Cameron. I've heard from the British government. I know Keir Starmer and David Lammy, and I'm sure that they're also in solidarity with us and our nationals who are overseas.
Yes, Prime Minister, you talk about the devastation and the fact that so many countries from around the world are seeing what your people are going through and reaching out, because what we're seeing on social media, for example, roofs being ripped off, entire lives and communities being upended. How do you recover from something like this?
Well, we have to recover by having faith in ourselves and our ability to do things with assistance from friends and allies. We have gone through a lot in the recent years, COVID, volcanic eruptions, and we were on the path now of a genuine liftoff. And then this calamity. We are having more frequent hurricanes, storms, greater intensity, and this matter is one of urgency for the entire world. Because if we don't take care of this matter of global warming and the deleterious climate change, we're going to find in 50 years that this earth would be inhospitable to its inhabitants.
And we hear those pledges, don't we, Prime Minister, from across the globe at conferences when different reports come out warning of these sorts of things intensifying, and not just intensifying but becoming the new normal. What we're seeing, through Hurricane Beryl being what becomes normal for so many people, which is unsustainable. People cannot live with this. And despite these pledges, though, do you think that enough is being done?
Enough is not being done. First of all, we have to get to net zero very soon, globally, and we are far from that. And then resources are required. Resources have been pledged for mitigation and adaptation, and those resources have not come. There is no climate justice currently in the world. We haven't had anything to do with global warming in our Caribbean, and yet we are on the front lines. And if you had allowed certain noxious substances or any wastewater or anything like that to go from a neighbor's property to your property, you will sue them, because they would have caused you loss and damage. Well, that is happening on a large scale. And the global political economy, which is lopsided, it continues in this untrammeled manner. And you get soothing noises at conferences, but we don't see alterations in the nature of that political economy.
Do you think
Nor do we see the funding for countries like ours.
Prime Minister, you have led your country for well over 2 decades. You've been in power a long time. There have been other hurricanes and natural disasters. As you say, you're still recovering from the volcano eruption that you experienced. Have you seen anything like what you're seeing at present?
Well, with the volcano, we had to evacuate the volcanic eruptions. We had to evacuate 20% of our population, and we had them in shelters for about 5 months. But the area of the devastation in the southern Grenadines, I mean, the thing is just unspeakable. To see it, my dear sister, is like reading the book of Revelation when John of Patmos is describing the Armageddon. It's just awful, awful.
Prime Minister, we're really grateful that you've joined us. Thank you so much for speaking to us and our audiences.
Thank you.
OK, we've just got some breaking news that has come in to Sky News. We're hearing reports that a Met Police inspector has been arrested on suspicion of rape. There's a statement from a Met Police spokesperson, and the statement says a serving Met officer has been arrested on suspicion of rape and other offences. The officer, an inspector in the Met Specialist Firearms Command, was arrested on Monday, the 24th of June. He was bailed to return in mid-September, pending further inquiries. He's been suspended from duty. The matter has been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. So that's just some news coming in the last few minutes that a Met Police inspector has been arrested on suspicion of rape, and some information there from a Met police spokesperson saying that the officer has been suspended from duty and was arrested on Monday, the 24th of June. He was bailed and will return in mid-September, pending further inquiries. Now let's go back to the rest of the day's news. And children make up almost half the population in Gaza. And after 9 months of war, their suffering is only worsening, with fears of famine not going away. Sky News has witnessed the immense levels of suffering among those caught up in the conflict. It comes as the UN warns it's becoming too dangerous to distribute aid. Our Middle East correspondent, Ali Bankol, has this report, which I should warn you includes footage of dead children and distressing images from the start.
The chances of a newborn baby surviving in Gaza now are not good. This child is only a few days old and fighting for her life. The bones of her exposed ribcage heave up and down as each small breath takes great effort. She barely has the strength to keep living. Look at how the nappy dwarfs her skeletal body. Her mother is so malnourished herself that she cannot breastfeed, and so her baby is dying because she cannot get the nutrition that newborns so desperately need.
Within 2 weeks, we detected more than 1,250 patients of malnutrition. This were all detected in the our hospitals, which means that this number of most likely increase in the coming days.
Amjad is 3 years old, but weighs only 5 kilos. His mother stays by his bed all day, helpless to do very much but cuddle her son. Amjad has now left Gaza for emergency treatment with a few other desperately ill children. They were driven across the border into Israel and then Egypt. There is hope that they will survive. That evacuation came too late for this baby. She was born 2 months premature because her mother was so exhausted. And then she starved to death in the only home that she knew, a hospital incubator. Her parents didn't get a chance to name her. Even wrapped in a green shroud, you can sense how tiny her body is inside.
All around are babies here waiting to die, one by one, like my daughter. There is no medicine, no dietary supplements, no treatment whatsoever. We cannot live.
The Rafah border crossing with Egypt remains closed because the IDF continues to occupy and operate in the land around it. The US military pier that has been so ineffective so far has restarted operations again, but a lot of the aid isn't being distributed because of security concerns. Under international pressure, Israel has released images of aid stacked up on the Gaza side of the Kerem Shalom crossing, claiming that the aid is getting in, but blaming the UN for not collecting it. The UN, though, has said that it is often too dangerous to distribute aid and that the organisation is close to suspending its operations. Much of Gaza is now just a network of streets and alleys, lined by high mounds of rubble and the shells of homes and shops. Fuel is scarce, so donkey and cart is the best way to get around, if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's on foot. In northern Gaza, children queue with their pans or plastic buckets, patiently waiting for the daily handout of food. It is well into the summer here now. Temperatures are regularly into the mid or high 30s. Today's meal is plain rice. A couple of scoops will have to feed the whole family. Some of the children thrust their bowls to the front, desperate not to miss out. When it's almost all gone, they scrape what they can from the bottom. Nothing can go to waste. Old or young, war has little respect for age, and it is always, always the most vulnerable who suffer the most. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Difficult scenes coming out of Gaza there. Well, let's get more of a sense of what's happening on the ground and how difficult that job is to get aid into Gaza. With me now is the Director of Planning for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, Sam Rose. Thank you very much, Sam, for joining us here on the programme. It's difficult to see those images that we've continued to see progressively over the last 9 months as this war has continued.
Absolutely. I mean, it's deeply, deeply upsetting, deeply troubling to see those images. And these are stories that we're hearing from people around Gaza over the past eight months. Those children we saw in the incubators, some of whom sadly died, are products of the war. Their parents have been pregnant throughout the war, and their lives are just utter misery. The parents will have been displaced multiple times. They'll have lost their homes, they'll have likely lost all their belongings, lost many family members, and dealing with pregnancy, dealing with young children, and constantly being shunted from one part of Gaza to another in utter misery.
Yeah, and that is also part of, the issue around malnutrition, being displaced from one place to another over and over again is causing them to not be able to have any form of stability. I mean, what was, striking in that report, and something that you see when you travel to anywhere where people are suffering from this level of famine, is that it's usually the parents who are suffering from malnutrition as well. It's just less visible than it is with the children.
Yeah, it's less visible, and I guess it has less lifelong impacts. I mean, children who suffer from malnutrition in the first 2 years of their lives, and also have had mothers who have been malnourished whilst they've been gestating, they're at real risk of lifelong physical and developmental issues in terms of cognitive abilities, in terms of physical abilities. And we focus so much during this conflict on aid and trucks getting in, which on one level is very dehumanizing, but it also misses the point in terms of what we need to do to get on top of the catastrophic food insecurity situation that's being faced in Gaza right now. Yes, people need the basics. They need calories, but they also need water. They need healthcare. They need infrastructure. They need toilets, and they need to avoid the trauma that destroys them mentally and destroys their immune systems. And indeed, we've lots and lots of stories from our health clinics of children being treated for malnutrition and then just go right back out into exactly the same conditions, and then they relapse, or else even worse, they're not able to complete the treatment because they're displaced again. And over the past week alone, 1 in 6 people in Gaza have received evacuation orders. So the level of and the scale of this is just immense.
Yeah, it's devastating. The other thing is that Israel has continued to say, and I've spoken to Israeli officials on this programme, that the aid they're allowing to get in, but they're pointing the finger at the UN for not getting their act together fast enough to be able to distribute it.
Yeah, I mean, look, this antagonistic, this confrontational relationship being played out on social media is deeply unhelpful and does a disservice to the humanity of people in Gaza who are living under the most atrocious conditions. It remains extremely difficult to get supplies into Gaza. It always has done. It was, even before the 7th of October, everything that came into Gaza was strictly monitored and subject to very stringent procedures. Those procedures have intensified, but as a result of the conflict, which is now entering it, coming on for 9 months, that going on for that long, we're seeing breakdowns in law and order inside Gaza, things starting to fall apart. So as well as problems at the crossing, there are also problems with our staff being able to get from that crossing. I mean, just this evening, truck drivers have been arrested on their way back from the crossing, and that's blocked the entire crossing for anything else going in and going out. So we've got some of our staff trapped down there tonight. Just doing anything in the environment in Gaza now is incredibly difficult. Truck drivers going down there are passing through conflict zones, active fighting zones, very difficult, very dangerous environments that we're having to work in.
Yeah, and as you say, the fabric of society starts to fray in these situations, and so does law and order. Just briefly, if you can, you're in Gaza now, you've got teams there at the moment where entering 9 months into this conflict, you know, just give us a sense of the situation there now with the actual fighting.
Yeah, I mean, there's bombardments going on all the time, all around me. I'm in central Gaza and we hear it all day and we hear it all night. But just in the past week, we've had new operations starting in Gaza City, 85,000 people displaced over a very short period of time. And then 2 days ago, evacuation orders issued for 250,000 people in Khan Yunis and in Rafah. So the conflict just appears to go on and on and on. And every day is worse than the previous day. And every tomorrow is worse than today. People are shattered. They're exhausted. They've just had enough. They feel abandoned. They feel humiliated. They feel helpless, and that they've got no element of control whatsoever over any aspects of their lives anymore. It's simply tragic.
It is. Sam, we're really grateful that you're able to join us at this hour on the programme. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, a record-breaking day at the Tour de France. Sir Mark Cavendish makes history with a 35th stage win, more than any other rider. Sir Mark Cavendish has made history at the Tour de France with a 35th individual stage win, more than any other rider. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports on the record-breaking moment.
This is what Sir Mark Cavendish does best. Honed over 15 times competing at the Tour de France, all that experience and expertise, mastering the sprint finish, building to this moment.
He's hit the front here, Mark Cavendish is there!
A record 35th stage win.
This is history!
More than anyone else in the 121 years of cycling's premier race. The record held since 1974 by Belgian rider Eddy Merckx, only equalled by Cavendish in 2021, after 5 winless years with illness and injury. And the prospect of ever eclipsing it looked over, after crashing out of last year's Tour and breaking his collarbone. But retirement plans were put off, the Astana team going all in to accomplish Project 35. But this tour began last week for the 39-year-old with vomiting in the scorching Italian heat. Never write him off, the recovery and the resolve. And 16 years after that first Tour win, the Manx Missiles milestone moment was accomplished in a small town near Lyon.
For us, he's just Cav. He's bubbly, he's enthusiastic, he's got a huge love for the sport and an incredible passion for the power of the sport. So that's how he'll be remembered as an individual, but fundamentally as the world's greatest ever road racing sprinter.
When the Isle of Man rider first entered the Tour de France in 2007, just one stage win would have satisfied him. But now Mark Cavendish is the most prolific stage winner, cycling's greatest ever sprinter. Rob Harris, Sky News.
Well, that's all for tonight's programme. We started with the Democrats' major dilemma over Joe Biden. We finished with another congressman within the party calling for him to step down. Good night.